Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mars. My name is Karin, and today we're talking about managing risks in space exploration. We are going to, after a short introduction, we're going to look into some technical risks, then into some risks to human space flight, and we will then end with a conclusion. So to first of all introduce myself, my name is Karin Brunnemann. I'm from Slovakia. I have a education background in business information systems, in psychology, in intercultural business communication, and in management. And I work a lot in the space industry. I am project manager for Borospace, which is a small Slovak startup building suborbital rockets and developing sustainable rocket fuel for the European Space Agency, ESA. I'm also involved in a couple of analog missions. I'm a flight planner for the Austrian Space Forum's Amadee 20 mission that took place last October in the Negev Desert in Israel. And I am an official business partner of Habitat Marte in Brazil, who are our hosts today. Yes, I want to go to space. I applied as a candidate for Dear Moon. I made it into round 2. Then I got deselected. Now I have bought some tickets to win a seat on the first Virgin Galactic flight. Actually, I've bought 1,000 tickets to increase my chances. So hopefully I will also really go to space very soon. But enough about me. Let's dive into risk management. So if we look at some definition, what is a risk? In Wikipedia, it says risk is the possibility of something bad happening. Risk involves uncertainty about the effects, implications of an activity with respect to something that humans value, often focusing on negative and undesirable consequences. Now, I'm a project manager, and in project management, risk is something neutral. And we define risks not only in a negative way, but for us in project management, a risk can be either a threat or an opportunity. Yeah, so there is also a risk that something good can happen. So we have to be aware of the definition of risk when we talk about risk management in space exploration. And risks are often classified in terms of their probability. Is it highly likely that something will happen, or is it not very likely? And then also what will be the impact if something happens? Yeah, and in space flight, the lowest impact can be some simulations or some tests are not working, or some results are lost or destroyed, or they're not working as they should. Or if we go a bit higher on the impact scale, yeah, the system can be destroyed. Yeah, a rover can break down, or some database gets destroyed, and the science data is lost. Can happen. Then if we climb up the scale, there is a risk to humans that somebody gets injured or even gets killed in space flight. And the highest risk would, of course, be to humanity as such, but we don't see such risks in human space flight. One risk that we're currently running is of course the climate crisis that poses a threat to the entire humanity. Yeah, and within that framework, we usually have an area where we say, okay, the risk is acceptable. Yeah, for example, if there is a risk that a human being will be injured, but the probability is extremely low, yeah, then the risk is acceptable. Yeah. We also, when driving our cars or participating otherwise in traffic, we constantly risk our health and safety. We're still doing it. We're accepting the risk that we might end up in a car crash when we're participating in traffic. Yeah. Also, if the probability is very high, but the impact is very low, that's also acceptable. Yeah, might be a high risk, high probability that I hurt my knee when I move my chair under the table because there is a leg of the table, but the impact is not very high. Yeah, I say ouch, and that's it. I might get a little bruise, but it's not really something that has to be avoided at all costs. Now, in human spaceflight especially, but also in uncrewed missions, we often expand this zone a little bit. We take more risk than we would normally do. Yeah, because we want to explore. We want to push our boundaries. And that's not only in space flight, it's actually what makes us human. We want to explore. People are risking their lives by climbing or trying to climb Mount Everest. They are risking their lives when they participate in car races or in some extreme sports. So there and in space flight, we have to push the boundaries a little bit, because otherwise we will not achieve our goal to, for example, go to Mars. We had to push the limit already when we went to the moon and to the ISS. So this is what we have to be aware of when we talk about space flight and also analog missions. There are risks in analog missions. Yeah, people can break a leg or something like that. We have to know where our green zone is, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Yeah. I would actually like to add a third dimension that is very, very important in space exploration. Yeah, we've talked about the probability. We've talked about the impact, but there is one more element, and that is detectability. That means when something happens, how long will it take me to actually know that it has happened? Yeah. So will I know immediately, oh, something broke? Or will I know a month later that something broke? And that is very, very important. The lower the detectability is, the higher we have to value the risk as such. Yeah, if there is a big chance that we won't even see that something went wrong until it's far too late to do any corrective action, that is when it gets really bad. So especially in high risk undertakings like spaceflight, we need to add this dimension of detectability. Yeah, what do we do when we discover risks, negative risks? Our first approach should, of course, be to eliminate the risk. Yeah, do something so it won't happen. Make sure it does not happen. Yeah, we can substitute. Yeah, we use a different material on the Mars rover so the wheels don't get destroyed that easily, because we have identified that as a risk based on previous Mars missions. We can redesign something. Now it's got to get 12 wheels instead of 6 wheels. So to take the weight of each individual wheel. Then we need to train and educate people who are involved in these undertakings, so everybody knows exactly what they are doing and why and how they are doing it. And the last step is to protect oneself from the impact. Yeah, that is why we sometimes put a helmet on. We should, of course, start with eliminating the risk of something falling onto our head. Yeah, but sometimes it's not possible to entirely get rid of that risk. So the last step that we do is protect ourselves. Yeah. Okay, then let's look a bit into technical risks in spaceflight. And we have seen quite many substantial technical risks that actually manifested. The latest, what happened was the James Webb Space Telescope. Engineers there were in the process of attaching the telescope to its launcher adapter, which is the large ring you can see at the bottom of this of the telescope adapter. And a security clamp unexpectedly popped open. So this was the worst thing that has lately happened to James Webb Telescope. And I spoke like almost a year ago to the project manager of this telescope, and I asked him, so what is the biggest risk that the telescope is facing? And he said that it will not properly unfold in space. Yeah, and here we go, a clamp snapped. And we focus so much on the big risks that the smaller risks get kind of forgotten and they don't get to get enough attention. But still, this could have, I mean, now it only delayed the mission by, I think, 4 days, but it could have damaged the telescope as such. Yeah, so we must be aware of both big and small risks. Yeah. That is a very, very recent example. Another example, sorry, yeah. It was the Mars Climate Orbiter. That's an older one, but a very, very massive loss for NASA. Yeah. It was lost in 1999, and it was lost because of cultural differences, because NASA is working with a metric system, and one of the suppliers was working with imperial measurements. And there was data transmitted about the thrust, and yeah, one transmitted it in pound force, and the other one received the figure and handled it as Newton. So it happened then that the Mars Climate Orbiter went too fast and it crashed onto Mars's surface. Yeah. And again, it was a rather small thing that led to the loss of the entire mission. And if I'm not very much mistaken, the damage was about $120 million at that time, plus, of course, years of lost research. And we must look into risks from different angles. Yeah, in this case, it was a cultural angle. Now, we can have issues with differences in writing dates, with differences in currencies. Yeah, dollar is in, what is a dollar? Is it a US dollar or Canadian dollar or Australian dollar? We don't know if it's just got the dollar sign. And to make things worse, in many Latin American countries like Colombia, they use the dollar sign to just mean money, not a specific currency. So, and then of course, misunderstanding because of different languages and other cultural differences can cause tremendous losses, and we need to include them into into our risk management. I had about, I think it was 1.5 years ago, I did a presentation to a very well-known, very large satellite company about cultural aspects of risk. Shocked that culture can have so much impact on risk. So luckily they haven't lost anything yet. So we need to take these aspects into consideration as well. Then we have a very big risk that is called go fever. Yeah, and that means we're in a rush to get a project launched, a rocket launched, a satellite launched, and we're in such a hurry that we actually overlook risk or issues. Yeah, it can be, especially when we have very narrow launch windows. To Mars, you have to wait like a 1.5 years to get for the next one, and it's very and yeah, without properly investigating what can go wrong. And was the Challenger, yeah, the space, and it was lost because of different risk assessment. Yeah, you have in the engineering culture, yeah, the risk culture is based on concrete measurements. The engineers said, no, you cannot launch if the temperature is less than 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Engineers were very, very clear about that. But then the management have a different risk culture. They say, okay, it's a trade-off. We can't let our customer NASA down. We cannot postpone the launch yet another time. And then they got under pressure with this go fever. We have to go now. We have to go. We have waited for so long. We have already scrubbed the launch a couple of times. Now we have to go. And then ultimately the management made the decision to go and overlook the risks with the O-rings, unfortunately. So it's very dangerous if you have these deadlines and you're trying everything to just meet the deadline. Yeah. So these are some technical things that have happened and that we have to be aware of when we look into risk management. These are obviously, because we don't have so much time today, these are obviously just some examples, and it's a rough overview of how we do risk management. So I just wanted to give you some insights into a couple of specific cases, as we can design an entire study program for 5 years for risk management in the space industry. So if we look into more the human sides of risk, what are the risks, not to technology? I mean, Challenger, of course, it costs human life, but it was a technical risk because the risk was that the rocket would explode because the O-rings would not insulate properly. But humans can be affected directly by risk. And NASA have identified 5 major areas where human beings can be affected: at space radiation, the isolation and confinement, distance from Earth, hostile and closed environments, and altered gravity fields. Yeah, that is either in microgravity, for example, on the International Space Station, or when we go to Mars, we have about one third of Earth's gravity. Yeah, so this our bodies are obviously built for Earth's gravity, and it changes the blood flow. For example, yeah, our hearts are pumping the blood around in our body because gravity pulls our blood down. If you're on the ISS in microgravity, there is nothing to pull the blood down. The heart keeps beating, so too much blood gets into the head because the heart would not have to pump that hard. This is why astronauts, when you see them on the space station, they always look very puffy. They have a really blown up face because all the blood is getting to the head. Yeah, so if we look at the medical risks, yeah, there is obviously like space sickness. It's like motion sickness because there are problems with orientation. Yeah, there is no up and down anymore. We can get cancer from space radiation. We can injure ourselves. Yeah, we will have to face loss of muscle mass because we don't have gravity, loss of bone density as well, issues with eyesight, yeah, that the retina starts starts detaching, which is almost exclusively observed in men, in male astronauts, not so much in female astronauts, and we don't really know exactly why this is, but let's find out. Yeah, we can have a decreased immunity due to a very different life in space. We can even have malnutrition, especially if we go to Mars. If we don't have a fully developed agriculture there, so we are depending on a certain range and amount of food, and it can happen that something happens and we don't get to harvest what we have planted, and we saw it in one of the biosphere experiments in the US. That was an analog mission where people did not in the end get sufficient nutrition there. Yeah. We can develop cardiovascular diseases, intoxication, yeah, because of poisonous gases, poisonous atmosphere on Mars. We can't breathe the atmosphere there, and we can of course get gastrointestinal issues depending on what we eat and how we live there, and many more medical risks to human space flight. And then there are of course also psychological risks. Yeah, is isolation. We don't have our normal social life. We have a lack of personal space and privacy. We can develop anxiety. We can be bored if we don't have enough to do, because there's not so many different things that we can do on Mars, especially the early settlers. Yeah, our cognitive functions can be impaired. Team dynamics can lead to frictions in the team. You know, we have the third quarter phenomenon. During the third quarter of a stay, no matter how long we are going to stay, in the third quarter, the morale usually takes a dip. We have to deal with unwanted tasks. For example, if we tell the astronauts they have to do 2 hours of exercise every day, they might just one day say, no, I'm not doing it anymore. I've had enough. No? Or that they have to wash the dishes all the time, and I mean, people get into conflict because of this here on Earth often enough. We have a lack of control because usually the flight director says what's going to be done. We have human technology interaction that might not go as smooth as possible. And for that, I can highly recommend Habitat Marte's video by Alex Arroyo, who is present in this meeting. He's done a very interesting presentation on robots on Mars, and also covered a bit the human technology interaction. Yeah, we can have personal behavior issues. We can have issues relating to spacecraft and habitat design, that it's not really comfortable or it's not what we're used to. Obviously, homesickness can kick in, and once we come back, we might get issues regarding to reintegration. Yeah, if you have been on Mars for 1.5 years, you come back to Earth, things might not be as they used to, and you will have developed a different mindset. You have grown in different areas than people on Earth have grown. So there might be some conflict or some issues with reintegration into the normal life, whatever normal means these days. So, yeah, what is the conclusion from all this? When we look at NASA, NASA has taken a couple of very good steps to reduce the risk, especially when it comes to human spaceflight, but also for technical issues. Yeah, so at NASA, we're not just expected to respond positively to criticism, but to go one step further and draw attention to our own mistakes. Yeah, so we actually shout out, "Hey, I've made a mistake." The reason is of course that mistakes are there to learn from. We have to make sure that if we make a mistake, everybody knows about it, that they don't repeat the mistake. Now that we build in some safeguards that the mistake cannot happen anymore, something like that. Yeah. But as this is what Chris Hadfield actually wrote in his book, in his highly recommendable book. That's not easy because astronauts are very competitive people. Yeah, if you apply to be an astronaut, you are up and against a couple of tens of thousands other applicants. So you have to be very competitive to make it through the selection process. But if you're that competitive person, you're probably not very likely to want to talk about your mistakes. Yeah. So it's a bit of a balancing act here to still encourage these hyper-competitive people to actually admit and publish their mistakes. And some more great lessons that NASA shared. It's actually from the Apollo Challenger Columbia Lessons Learned program. When you see something, you say something. Yeah. When you see that this doesn't look right to me, then you stand up and you say it. Yeah. And yeah, expert opinions are just that. They're just opinions. Also, the biggest expert in the field can be wrong. Yeah. So we have to be a bit careful of just taking words at their face value. Yeah. And we should watch out for the normalization of deviance. That means if we see a mistake or we think something is not like it should be and keeps repeating itself, we should not be fooled into thinking that, oh, we're always doing like that, we're continuing like that, so it must be right. That is a big danger that can happen. So everything that is seems to be non-nominal, we have to raise a red flag immediately. This is also, of course, very true for analog missions. Yeah, also there, if we see that something is not right, we have to say it. Yeah, we have to also challenge the opinions of experts, and we have to watch out for anything non-nominal. Yeah. And we definitely need more research for crewed missions into more female astronauts, because I think about 85% of the astronauts so far were men. We need to have more diversity in space. ESA has made a start that they are also opening applications for disabled astronauts. Yeah, we have to research more into positive space psychology, because it's not enough, especially for very long-term space flights, like a year on the ISS or 1.5 years going to Mars and back. It's not enough that we are not unhappy. We have to be happy. Yeah, just removing everything that makes us unhappy is simply not enough for long time stays in space. We need to research more extreme stays in space, yeah, like longer term missions. We need to have more analog missions that last like 1.5 years or 2 years, to really and maybe in a bit harsher environments as well. We need to more research into psychological preparation of astronauts and prevention of psychological issues, and that's actually not only for astronauts but also for the people who remain on Earth, for the family members, also for the mission support teams. Yeah, they also get stressed when something is wrong with the astronauts. Yeah. Psychological analogs. Yeah, that mimic the real psychological stress of space flight a lot more, like underwater missions, for example, where you can't just open the door and walk out if you have had enough or if you broke a leg. And then, of course, research into reintegration. Yeah. So what can analog how can analog missions contribute? Yeah, they can research into team performance, in impact on isolation, in relationships between flight crew and mission support center, cultural issues, yeah, coping in extreme and stressful environments. Even, I mean, the analog missions we are currently doing, they're not very stressful. Yeah, they are pretty comfortable still. Yeah, there are some restrictions, but it's only for a short time, and it's always with this thought in the back of your head that, yeah, well, if something happens, I can just walk out, unless it's underwater. You can't. Yeah. Fluctuation of team cohesion. Now, if we go for longer term space flights, there is also a risk that when, for example, team members change roles or change their areas of work, which will happen if it's longer time, yeah, from that can also arise team cohesion issues or even conflict. Yeah. And of course, the habitat design. How does the habitat design impact the well-being of the astronauts? And we are currently, there is a lot of research and emphasis on what is functional, but it should be also what is comfortable for the astronauts, not only the functionality. And we need to look more into habitat design. And when you look at risk management, what can virtual analog missions like Habitat Marte, how can virtual analog missions contribute to research in risk management for space exploration? There is kind of a couple of things. Yeah, we can develop and publish risk checklist. Yeah, so we have a list where we really describe every single risk that can happen. And it's very difficult to make such a complete list because the number of things that can go wrong is basically indefinite. So the more we work on these risk checklists, the better they will be and the more complete they will be. Now we can, in an analog mission, propose strategies for risk management. We can discover and outline new research questions or hypotheses. We can do meta-analysis of past space missions or past analog missions and compare how the risk management was handled in each of these missions and what the risk was. And I always, whenever I get a chance, when there is an analog mission or a real space mission, I ask people beforehand, what do you think will be the biggest risk? And not a single time was the answer before the risk that really then was the biggest one in the mission. It always turned out to be something totally different. And that's scary from my perspective. Yeah, if people cannot really predict the highest risk. And then, yeah, with the James Webb telescope, for example, was a totally different answer. I also asked some persons for in-person analog missions, yeah, what is the biggest risk? And in the end, it was something totally different. So it might be a good thing to use virtual analog missions to actually look into past missions and read their mission reports and then use this for the development of protocols and safety measures that can be used in other analog missions, but also in real space missions. And then, of course, the design and evaluation of training regarding risk management, but also regarding safety standards and regarding those training regarding those protocols and some safety measures. And how can it help us here on Earth? And of course, if we develop really good safety measures and risk management approaches, we can reduce accidents on Earth. And we can also improve psychological safety, thus contributing to the United Nations Sustainability Goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. That will, if we identify risks for spaceflight and identify how we can actually eliminate them, minimize them, transfer them, that might very well benefit us here on Earth as well. Yeah, and with that, here is some references I have been using. And other than that, I am open to questions. If you watch this presentation as a recording, if you have questions, here is how to get in touch with me as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for questions of the participants now.